I will. All
Awesome.
right. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Yes, all good.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our very first virtual presentation of our 2024-2025 speaker series, The History of Firefighting, Early Bytown to Modern Ottawa, given by guest speaker Peter McBride. My name is Sarzad Khan, and I am the regular events director for the Historical Society of Ottawa. I and Jacob Saloom will be your hosts tonight. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge whose land it is that we meet on tonight. Next slide.
Sorry, it didn't jump. Right, just go ahead.
For thousands of years before colonial times, the members of Indigenous communities traveled from far and wide to gather at the meetings of the three rivers, the Ottawa, the Gatineau, and the Rideau, from the Chaudière Falls to the mouth of the Gatineau River. This area is rich in natural resources, plants, animals, and fish. And it also provided a convenient meeting place for trade and communication among communities. Of special significance are the burial place at Hull Landing and the Chaudière Falls, a sacred place for meeting and sharing in ceremonies. The burial grounds in the Ottawa-Gatineau corridor, including Hull Landing, were important for rituals of respect and bonding with the landscape. Victoria Island, located under the Porthouse Bridge, continues to provide this sacred space to local and visiting Indigenous people. The National Capital Region, which includes the City of Ottawa, remains unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. We encourage our members and guests to reflect on this, our connected history, and the ways we can contribute to reconciliation. Next, we would like to extend our thanks to the City of Ottawa, the Province of Ontario, and last but never least, to our membership. Without your support, none of what the Historical Society of Ottawa does would be possible. In fact, if you would like to become a member of the Historical Society of Ottawa, I will be putting the link to do so in the chat box. We welcome people to become members of the HSO to support our activities such as today's speaker event, our in-person series, awards for students, and our Bytown pamphlet series. As this is the first speaker event for this year, I wanted to update you briefly on what the HSO has been up to this summer and a few exciting things coming up. This summer, our museum club was very successful. We visited locations such as Dickinson Square in Manotick and the Merrickville Blockhouse Museum. We are planning more visits for next summer, and we would love any feedback and any suggestions for future visits. You should also look forward to news about a tour of the National Research Council. Details to follow. You can keep up to date on our website. I am also very excited to announce that the HSO is launching a French speaker series. We have talks coming up on October 5th on a secret society founded in Ottawa and on November 2nd on the Chateau Laurier, both held at the Saint Laurent branch of the Ottawa Public Library at 1 p.m. The details are available on our website, and we hope to see you there. Now we turn to our English series. The Historical Society of Ottawa has been telling Ottawa's great stories for 126 years, including now to our twice-monthly speaker series. As you know, we currently run two separate parallel speaker series. In-person presentations are held in the Ottawa Public Library auditorium. In addition, we bring our virtual presentations into the comfort of your own home via Zoom, as we are tonight. On September 28, Professor Brian McDougall will tell us about striking moments of solidarity in the Chaudière district at 1 p.m. and the main branch of the OPL. And excitingly, on the next day, September 29th, Brian will also be leading a walking tour called from sacred site to industrial wasteland, colonialism and class struggle in the Sodier district. Tickets cost $35 by e-transfer or cash at the conclusion of the tour. You can find the details on our website. Then on October 9th, next slide. Then on October 9th, we will be back with another virtual presentation at 7 p.m. on Zoom, this time with a presentation on the history of the Historical Society of Ottawa, which was founded in 1898, given by Connie Wren Gunn. If you'd like to learn about one of the oldest historical societies in Ottawa, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Which finally brings us to tonight's presentation. Before I introduce Peter, a reminder to everyone to kindly keep your settings on mute so as not to interfere with our speaker's presentation, and turning off your video feed once we get going. This assists with the overall transmission as well. Tonight's presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, so during the presentation, please start typing your great questions into the chat box. It is my honor to introduce Peter McBride, President of the Bytown Fire Brigade Historical Society. Chief McBride, our guest speaker, is a 32-year veteran of the Ottawa Fire Service, a Canadian registered safety professional, and a passionate advocate for fire literacy. That's firefighting, instruction, research, and engineering. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I will start off by saying that I seem to be experiencing some technical difficulty. The slides are changing on their own. I'm not touching anything. So bear with me. I seem to have to keep going at the cursor for some reason. Tonight's presentation is really an amalgam of, if you will, a short overview of the history of Bytown and its firefighting, and transitioning through from 1900, jumping right into, if you will, 2001 to 2024, to give a contrast of, if you will, that history of firefighting. Given it's 45 minutes, we can't do the whole history of Ottawa as it relates to firefighting. Having said that, this is an important piece that's shown on the cover here of the first slide, the Dominion. The Dominion was the first hand pumper on Barracks Hill, and this was rescued by the Bytown Fire Brigade and restored to working order. This will place a stream about 3 stories high. It still works, and we used it just a couple of weeks ago for our annual pump day. It was up on Parliament Hill, just beside Barracks Hill, if you will, for a meet and greet for the National or the Canadian Fallen Firefighters Memorial Weekend. And today, being September 11th, is a special day. We know what the horror that was the World Trade Center and Pentagon, and subsequently fire departments across North America and in Europe have linked their memorials, if you will, for their locals, and tied it to the day. So this is an important day in the fire service, and I feel privileged to be here with you today. So the mission of the Bytown Fire Brigade, I won't read this for you, but essentially we're very active in acquiring and ensuring that we can, if you will, interpret, educate, and celebrate Ottawa and Canada's firefighting history. And we are a community of practice, just like the museum. The Historical Society, and that community of practice is very diverse. I'm sorry. All right, I think we're good.
Great.
So as I was relating our mission, vision, and values, and I think this is an area post-COVID, like so many organizations, the Bytown was suffering from loss of members, inability to actually access our premises, and actually death of some of our senior members. And so we're in an effort to, if you will, reform our organization. And part of that was looking at our values and building, if you will, a culture within our organization. So this was very important to us, and linking it to the Bytown. So my presentation tonight, I would like you to have a bit of a lens in the way you look at what I'm talking to you about. The word firefighting means something to everybody. And generally we think of firefighters and fire trucks and what have you. Well, what we want to do in the Ottawa Fire Service, as part of an exercise that we built a new fire dynamics program, and we really want to change what the word firefighting meant. And when we talk about firefighting, we wanted to break it down into this FIRE concept, where we looked at firefighting and what was firefighting, and anticipate, prevent, intervene, recover. Our instruction that didn't just include children and the public, if you will, right through to people doing masters and PhDs and postgraduate work, as well as research into the challenges. And that is one of the big aspects of firefighting today is, if you will, material science and the implications for that material science in the built environment for the firefighters. And obviously looking at it are solutions through engineering. And so that's the lens I've kind of would like you to think about as we go through this presentation. And I'll start off with a context, organization of the fire service in Bytown. And looking at our history, we realized that it was local business owners who really fronted the money, if you will, to buy equipment or raised through subscription with the townfolk or the business owners to effectively create, if you will, a fire brigade. And ultimately, that organization of volunteers moved and, if you will, transitioned to full-time paid firefighters and a combination thereof. And today we're a very complex, multidisciplinary organization, and it's all publicly funded. And so a big change. And if you take a look at the picture on the right of your screen, whilst this is earlier than I start my presentation in terms of history, it's very indicative, even at 1873, of the limited firefighting capability. And firefighting in those days was really about the idea of saving people's goods, removing them from the building. In many instances, there was insufficient water to fight the fire. If they got lucky, they would get it out. They had to use water carts. There was no waterworks. People got their water from the Ottawa River, and they were delivered by carts. And so these carts were engaged as part of a firefighting effort. There were maybe some rudimentary pumps, but generally it was bucket brigade. And the big aspect, you'll note, people moving goods. And so that was a big aspect of firefighting. It was really called salvage, what we call salvage today. They were removing materials that would allow them to either continue their business in some other location, or at least save some of their goods. And the idea of a subscription service is something that was active in Ottawa as well, or Bytown. And this is a building, 195 Cumberland Street, and this what is called a fire mark. And fire marks indicated to the brigades. And understand that the brigades are companies, and these companies at the time would either be related to an insurance company or a local group. And if you weren't a subscriber to that group, you may or may not get fire protection. Now, if my building was on fire and I didn't have a subscription, and your building wasn't on fire but was attached to my building, they may consider fighting that fire because you have a subscription. And so there are many aspects of the subscription service, and it created some great benefits, if you will, for the owners, and in some cases it created problems. And the plaque that was taken off that wall on Cumberland Street and now in the Bytown collection, the Bytown Fire Brigade collection, we made a wax casting of it. And it is the Royal Insurance Company of Liverpool, England. And that's about 1845. They start insuring buildings in Bytown. And this is what an actual plaque, a finished plaque, would look like. And the Liver Bird, if you know anything about Liverpool, it was the center of the empire's commerce. All the docks, insurance companies. It was an economic powerhouse in terms of the empire of the day. And so people would purchase insurance. And this would be the indication that your building was insured. And the fire brigade would actively either fight the fire or assemble enough people to remove your goods. And in terms of the built environment, again, very, very difficult if you think about today. Back then, really an unplanned settlement. And when I say mixed use here, I'm referring to the idea that you might have a leather shop beside a blacksmith, beside a lumberyard, or some place for storage of garbage. And next door is a residential location with, might have a wood stove in it. So these types of, if you will, assemblies, we call them today, or occupancies, I should say. And then they would be housed in highly flammable buildings, predominantly wood. Ottawa was a lumber town. And no guidance in terms of how and what you could build or where you could build or how close you could build to things, which are very common today. And again, the idea that firefighting was really about intervention and recovery, get your materials out of there. And very limited water supply, again, water carts or a pond or a creek, somewhere to draw water from to bring it to the fire. And in 1830, 1826, we find that Bytown is founded. And then essentially the first fire engine is established. And I showed it to you earlier in a finished mode, but this is the original prior to us basically restoring it. And that engine is what would be considered at the time a highly valued firefighting piece of equipment, but it was held by the British engineers on Barracks Hill. And they would race into the town to help fight fires. And it was very common for the militia of the day to do that. Very difficult to operate in as much as that it took 16 firefighters on those wooden handles. And those wooden handles would go across and they would seesaw pump it. And it would be being supplied by water carts, or if they had a creek that they could draft from, this thing would suck water from the creek and pump it. And you can get about a 3-story height out of the nozzle. So you could put water in places you couldn't do with a bucket, right? And as I said earlier, we still use it. In terms of Upper Town, sorry, I'm just going to close out my screen here. I've got this in the way. It's blocking my slides. I apologize, everyone. This has been a while since I've been on Zoom. There it is. Okay. Yeah, so Upper Town raises that money, and it's called the Mutual. And the reason, again, the insurance companies would put up money, and that money would be either matching money or sometimes a bulk of the money, and then they would have people raise funds or subscribe. And there were a number of fires throughout the town, and the Dominion, the Barracks Hill firefighting piece of equipment, and the Mutual were very successful in quelling a fire in Lower Town. And ultimately, Lower Town wants their own piece. And this is an interesting piece too, is, Upper Town is really better off than Lower Town. Lower Town is where what we call the workers' barracks are, and the laboring class. And then Upper Town is where you have the merchants and barons and what have you. And so that conflict of, if you will, economic class and culture, Catholics, Protestants, all play into how this fire service evolves over time. And okay, here we go. Okay, so that first organized fire company happens in 1838, and it's renamed in 1840 to the Chaudière Company. And to give you a little look at that Chaudière banner, which was an artifact that originally was held at the Bytown Museum and was given to the Bytown Fire Brigade. In 2013, I attempted to have it restored digitally. The technology wasn't there. And it's oil on silk on cotton. And this was a two-pole banner, and it would be hoisted for parades, processions through the town. And the Chaudière Company was world famous in as much as it won world champions, and much like you say, the World Series today, in North America. And they were a famous pumping company and excellent at their work. So well-funded and really well supported by volunteers. Ultimately, we were able to do that in 2023. And you can see how beautiful this banner is. And we're very pleased to have it in our collection. And it's highly representative of the similar type of pump, the Dominion. So a Uniman or a Perry pump, a brand. And we're not sure which one it is because there's no actual reference that we can find as to who the manufacturer is. Uniman was out of Boston. Perry was, the Perry pumper was out of Montreal. And it was a world-class fire engine of its day. Again, another piece of the context is the politics and the economics of Bytown. In 1835 to 45, there's extensive violence in the town. It's a lumber town. There's competition, if you will, for lumbering. And the Shriners, which is a gang of Irish workers who, and you hear the story of Jo Montfarin, French Canadian, and the battles that were associated with trying to disrupt other companies. Coupled with that, you had the Union of Upper and Lower Canada, and, if you will, the burning of what was the capital in Montreal, the Parliament in Montreal, and the desire of Lord Elgin to come to Ottawa, and sorry, it might be Lord Durham, come to Canada, come to Ottawa, or Bytown, my apologies, and look at Ottawa as a potential, or Bytown as a potential place for a new capital. And that is rebuffed by the locals as there is a conflict between liberals and reformists and, if you will, the Tories. And so tied into all that is that the Crown, at the similar area of time, allows what they call the District Council Act. That District Council Act, and this is part of the battle that went on in Montreal, is the devolution of powers from a central crown to local control. And that conflict is very much tied to the history of, if you will, the war in the United States with the UK, hence why we have the canal, right? So, and so there was arguments over how that would happen. And at the base of the canal, where it dumps into the Ottawa River, and the lands surrounding on either side are ordnance, the British Ordnance Department property, and are reserved for, if you will, fortifications. And at the same time, you have Bytown trying to be a town, but it's actually part of the township of Nepean. And Nepean says, no, you get a warden. And so there's this conflict, if you will, that ultimately this Crown District Council Act, they hold local elections. Well, those local elections lead to, if you will, arguments over who and why people can be elected. And then there's the violence associated with the Shriners disrupting that and electing people. And when they finally do have a council, the first mayor of Ottawa, Mr. Scott, the council issues a bylaw expropriating a piece of ordinance land and near Sappers Bridge. And this creates conflict with the ordinance department. And then the Queen, or through the Crown, disallows, if you will, the formation of a town, a council. And so in a very short order, that's resolved. But at a certain point, the ordinance department is establishing, if you will, a fence, not allowing people to come onto the land right at Sappers Bridge, to the point where at a certain point, there were pistols and, small cannon pointed. The militia wasn't having anything with the townfolk coming onto ordinance land. And then ultimately, it's 1850. And then Scott is reelected. And so he is actually the first mayor of Ottawa twice. But that whole conflict is not only do you have the political conflict in Upper and Lower Canada, you have the cultural conflicts and economic conflicts, and trying to form, if you will, a town, as well as organized firefighting. Very complex. So it's not till 1847 that we see the first hook and ladder company paired with the Alliance, and the Alliance being the pumper that is in Lower Town. And this is, again, representative. It's in our collection. It would typically, a vehicle like this, if you will, or an apparatus like this would be hand pulled. The ropes that you see at the front, at the handles, that's a piece of technology. Today, we would call that traction control. So easily two men could pull this. But when you came to a grade or a hill, locals would come out and that rope would be extended. It's on a little roll under the wheel. And that would be traction control to pull it up a hill or over an obstacle. So it, as I say, easily two people. And typically it would be have as well a series of buckets, because buckets were used for moving water. 1848, we see the town hall created in just off Elgin, and it really is a multifunction building, and we have a replica model of it in our collection, just to show that it was a fire department, a police department, as well as municipal offices, court, and town hall. And this was clearly a big civic meeting place. And so that, again, fire services at that time being sponsored by business people, the business people would provide space. There were no fire stations. Someone might have a shed, someone might have a building and offer a place to store the equipment. And depending on the level of support, that equipment will be properly stored or improperly stored. It's not till 1849 that we see, if you will, a bylaw, again, from this council, and designating wards and wardens, the east, the west, and the center ward. This becomes, if you will, upsetting to the Lower Town ward, in as much as they weren't consulted, and they felt that their brigade activities are now being driven by someone who doesn't live in their community, or again, because these positions would have been appointed by a council, and again, it might be somebody's friend or somebody's business, and there was money involved, and obviously social political conflict. And in 1851, a fire committee was formed through the council, and as I said, that whole issue of the dispute surrounding the warden appointment, And the Lower Town Brigade is very dysfunctional. And in the literature, it talks about they were a blue sky and torch parade. They would show up for that kind of stuff, but not for the fires. And they were almost non-existent. And fire committee needs addresses those issues to council. And it's 1853 that his authority is granted to build engine houses. And you'll see on the map in the East Ward, West and Central Ward, the little square triangle at Nicholas Street is much later, and it's the Queen Station, and that is problematic as well. So essentially, we're starting to see organization of the Bytown Fire Brigade. At the same time, they purchase engines, and if you will, the engine I showed you at the start, the Dominion or the Chaudière engine, the Perico out of Montreal, very, very famous. Its engine in 1851 wins a prize at the British National Exhibition, and then in 1953 or 55, I should say, 55, it wins a first medal in Paris. Montreal is selling engines all over the world because they're a very, very effective hand pump engine. And then there are other engines purchased, and these are distributed into those engine houses that I've talked. And you're looking at your population at about 10,000. Well, 1855, this is where things really start to change within Bytown, and the fire risks and the hazards associated with the change in the way that lumber is transported through traditionally large square cut timber rafts. And those square rafts are very wasteful of lumber. And what you start to see is now we have a train line, we have other methods of moving the wood. And at the same time, because of the waste, they start to establish sawmills and more sawmills. So that leaves a lot of wood and sawdust lying around, and you have these mills are operated using steam. They're steam fired boilers, and the fire brigade at the time is trying to get the owners of these mills to sort of separate, if you will, the activity of the saw machine, or at least keep it clean around it to avoid fires, right? And again, Ottawa was deemed the most acceptable location, and Parliament starts, and so you have a lot of people coming into the town from that first census, and really in less than 10 years, you have a 50% growth in population and a massive growth in number of dwellings and mills. Hazards have changed. In 1865, we have the Queen engine, and that Queen engine to replace the Alliance in Lower Town, and it is the last hand engine purchased. And one of the aspects of this is that, again, because brigades, there's no governing authority. And remember the term company, because they're incorporations. And the idea of an incorporation is you can't tell me what to do. I'm a legal entity. And they would have, if you will, a captain or guardian, maybe like the president. They would have a secretary, they would have a treasurer, and then they would have members. And so the Ottawa engine, having it, having the Queen stationed with the Ottawa led to brawls. And in fact, a call out for a fire, and there would be fights over, the rigs wouldn't even get out of the station. And then so again, council attempted to address this, and what they ended up doing is offering a $3 incentive. And again, that just leads to more conflict because they're now racing to the event, and again, brawls breaking out. So it's not until 1867, John Langford, first Ottawa chief, and if you will, takes the brigades. He has the confidence of the the town folk. He's well liked as a businessman. He's well liked as a fire officer. He was on the Chaudière Company, and as well, his deputy, highly respected in the French community in Lower Town. And so this allows, if you will, things to change within the organization. And Langford in 1869 identifies, if you will, his regret, but at the same time, hopefully looking forward. And he's identified this in his report to council. And he sees things moving forward. In 1870, J.R. Booth buys the first steam engine. So this is the first mechanical steam engine, and it's regularly dispatched to fires. It's immediately. And it's now part of what is Ingenium, what used to be Science and Tech. At the same time, 1870, we see the Ottawa Valley Fire. This is reminiscent of Fort McMurray, to put it in today's context. The winds are crazy. They're 100-mile-an-hour winds. And the attempts to, if you will, stop a fire, it brings everyone in the town to the response. And Little Italy is flooded. Preston Street is flooded to save the, if you will, the town. But spot fires for months, and we hear today, this past year, in the wintertime, the ground is still smoking, right? And the whole region is devastated. The losses are extensive, and pretty indicative of really a lack of firefighting. And 1873, we see a fire on Daly Street, and it consumes a whole block. The Conqueror is bought, which is another famous steam engine, and the John Hemy. But still, buckets and water carts and hand engines are very important to our operations. And it's not till 1874 Ottawa Fire Department is formed, and now we have a paid department, and it's from 74 to 87 volunteer companies are disbanded. This is a picture of that first Ottawa Fire Department. And 1874 sees, again, a very important benchmark, the establishment of waterworks and hydrants, but it's highly temperamental. Many of you have probably taken a shower and someone turned on another tap, and if you don't have pressure balance, you get burned. Well, those opening and closing of valves could break pipe, could break hose, and cause all kinds of things. Water carts are still a big issue. And fire alarm telegraph is commissioned. So now we now have pull boxes, ways to communicate that there's a fire in some part of the town. And it's 1874 that hose companies are formed, and hose technology has come along and be somewhat better than, if you will, it's still very prone to bursting, and leather, it has to be oiled to be maintained. So there's a lot of maintenance on it. And as I related, no pressure balance in the systems. Water carts are still. And I realized I had an aunt who used to say, when the fire trucks, I lived in Sandy Hill, when the fire trucks used to go through Sandy Hill, she said, there go the fire reels. Well, fire reels, these are fire reels. There's just a big roll of hose wrapped around the axle. And they had a bell, and every time that wheel did one rotation, the bell would signal out a fire bell. And even though in my time with my aunt, she's passed now, she remembers that those fire reels, horse-drawn fire trucks, if you will. And so, of course, Ottawa is a city in flames by the 1900s. There are many fires preceding that, but we see the Great Fire in 1900 that devastated the town and the city at this point, or I should say, the city of Ottawa. And so it's only 1903, again, J.R. Booth's mills, his materials, his wood, and in 1900 they identified and passed bylaws. By 1905, the council, if you will, was being bought off, it was felt. they were lumber kings. And so effectively, they didn't take heed of the fire prevention measures that were suggested. You can clearly see the amount of lumber, and it started on the hull side in the lower left of the screen. And by 1916, we were looking at the Parliament Hill fire. And again, all spectacular fires, all impacting, if you will, the organization and the capabilities of the fire service, which has me jump. Okay, I get this thing to work to 2001 and amalgamation, and 9 cities or nine entities are formed into one to form the Ottawa Fire Service. And to give you a geographical context, it's a massive change. And if you look at all the cities, the major cities in Canada that fit into the boundaries of Ottawa, Ottawa becomes extremely large. And you're dealing with, high-rise fires to, silo fires, barns, what have you. So, but it's important to understand amalgamation, again, that political context. There's a huge misconception about in the public's mind of what the fire service is. When they say firefighter or fire service, they think of it in terms of, they're all the same. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. And that was true in Ottawa and the surrounding amalgamated cities and towns. You had full-time, you had volunteers, and you had combination departments. They had different training, they had different equipment, they had different staffing, and they had a whole different experiential learning because of their built environment. And that's not to say the differences between these organizations is not some superior attribute. It just meant that they were different. And managing that change at amalgamation was highly complex. And there were many barriers to understanding, if you will, the different organizations. And it ultimately, we worked on building a learning culture. And that learning culture is where the Ottawa Fire Service is today. And it took a bit of focus. And the political reality is that we live in a highly complex, multi-jurisdictional city, federal, provincial, as well as, if you will, external embassies from around the world. And that aspect of firefighting is completely changed, if you will, the way we look at the city and how the city should be looked at. The number of people, the 1.25 million in the region. We also have our, what we'll call our Class 1A heritage buildings, such as Parliament. And all these aspects build new urban, suburban, and rural risks. And those risks are massive. And to address that, we have a very complex fire service. 45 stations, pumpers, ladder, towers, pumper tankers, a whole host of vehicles to deliver service and to protect that very complex city. And the organization is now with a chief and 4 deputies. And recently, the operations, the first female deputy chief in charge of all of the firefighting in the city of Ottawa, Louise Hines-Schmidt. Community standards, again, the second female deputy, Colleen Woosley. Both women have had storied careers within the fire service. And we have that administration and operational support services to manage 1,500 staff. The operations divisions is what you see on day in, day out, doing what firefighters do. And it's supported by those 45 stations, and 16 are paid on call. 5 are composite and 24 are full-time. There are 9 districts, and not only do they do firefighting, medical response, they do a lot of special operations, a highly technical response, if you will, to a variety of hazards. And we have a safety division, and that was where I originated. And it was very much structured around, what was the worst thing that could happen and who could it happen to? And what can I do about it? In a very, colloquial way of saying that we felt in the safety division that the consequences of the work shouldn't be borne by the worker. And so that's how we looked at it. And we protected the worker, we protected the organization. The training division, highly focused on certified training, accreditations, and delivery of training to recruits, in service, officer development, and other specialties. On our community standards, which is traditionally called fire prevention, looked after public safety, public information, officer recently added, and to really to address the multimedia world and communicate with the citizens of Ottawa in a very quick and in this very fast Twitterverse world. Our communications divisions looks at the receipt of the alarm and the way that those alarms come in through 911, someone phones, there's a monitor alarm or station still alarms, people walking into fire stations and saying, hey, there's a car crash over here. And then they do all the alerting or paging. Our volunteers are paged. They have pagers or they have an app on their phone that tells them to head to the station. And so a big part of what they do is manage important communications on the fire ground and to keep firefighters safe. And of course, recording and documentation. We have a capital asset division, and they really deal with a lot of the logistics of our PPE, our personal protective equipment, respiratory protection, the apparatus and equipment that we need to take to places, and of course, our other ancillary aspects of the fire service. And I started off with trying to redefine fire for you. And when we talk about firefighting, this IMS, incident management system, our command system, Ottawa Fire brings to events today a very structured approach to any emergency. And that any emergency, when we talk about firefighting, we are talking about all hazards. And as you've seen in the last few years with derecho and tornadoes and forest fires and stony in various places, this is what is the demand today, as opposed to just lumber yards. Now we deal with a whole bunch of other hazards, and we have capabilities to address that. And it's the command system that allows us to do that. And that command system is very much structured to account for and how we deploy and how we track our members, whether they're in a building or whether they're in the forest. It's knowing who is where and what they're doing and what resources they need. And again, figuring that all out through the incident management system. And the whole goal of the management system is to create a professional force that ensures business continuity, emergency planning, and, if you will, business continuity through emergency planning, the recovery side. Instruction is a big aspect of the fire service, and whether that's children, our firefighters, or, if you will, our chief officers and persons pursuing postgraduate work. And we've done a lot of research, and we're applying science, evidence-based activities, evidence-based research to our activities. We've done tactics. This area, a combustible metal roof or a traditional commercial building, regularly would burn down and significant loss. And so we did research on how to better fight these, and we have tactics that have been documented and published in fire journals on how to properly fight these fires effectively. We looked at how to move smoke in high rises with the National Research Council. And again, this is a picture of the Montreal Fire Department looking at different water application techniques. And we had a privilege of working with Montreal on this. And then, of course, we're looking at exposures to firefighters. We now know how toxic our environment is. And this gentleman, a friend of mine, he came on drill school with me, and we tested them. 20 minutes in wood smoke in a training burn, 20 minutes in wood smoke is equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes when measuring a certain chemical. And that doesn't account for all the plastics and all the other aspects of contaminants that we see today. We also know that our turnout gear doesn't actually protect us. that earlier research told us that it's a whole body exposure. For many, many years, everybody, wear your mask, but it's our bodies that were taking in these chemicals. Our skin is our biggest organ. And then we also were researching fire and how fire has changed. The green line represents how your buildings are tested, whether it's a fire door, a fire wall, fire floor. Well, in 20 minutes, that's a real fire. And the other one is 60 minutes. And this is repeatable. And essentially what that tells us is that at 20 minutes, why is there no data? Because the whole instrument failed. The ceiling came down, the floor collapsed. And so that's the environment we're in. It's a much more hostile fire environment. The fires have changed. And of course, addressing those issues is engineering and looking at building science, materials, how they perform, how the codes have changed from prescriptive and to performance-based codes. And what that means, a prescriptive code would say, you will do this, where performance says, well, if you can achieve that, go ahead and do it. And that really changes the way we look at buildings and how buildings are built. We now build 10 stories out of wood, but treat them as concrete buildings, high rises, traditionally out of concrete, as a type 1 building, a type 1 being a fire resistant building, because we've used 2 layers of drywall and it has an equivalency when tested in a furnace at the National Research Council. It meets a standard, that curve. But the reality is that the 3 leading causes of fire, men, women, and children, and that subgroup, the tradesperson, punches holes in walls, floors, and fire assemblies. And of course, there's failures. And that leads to greater fire because you're now dealing with wood structures. And we've looked at all kinds of floor testing and other aspects of performance because we have to operate on these floors to rescue people. And we also looked at fixed and passive systems. So these buildings are becoming much more complex. And that complexity adds complexity when you're trying to fight a fire. You need to understand the systems to be able to get water into the right place or control, if you will, the systems within that very complex system. So fire protection engineering is another big aspect of firefighting and looking at solutions and those solutions and how we apply them. I started off talking about, the memorial, our hand pump or the Dominion at the memorial. Well, and today being September 11th. This past weekend was the Ottawa Firefighters Memorial and the National Memorial. You see a young girl touching where her father's name is. Hats. These are all presented to the families of the families of firefighters who died in the line of duty. And when I started in the fire service, the big line of duty death was heart attacks, heat stress, collapse, trapped. And by far today, we've built controls for many of those aspects. By far is cancer. The majority of these deaths are cancer deaths. And so that is a big aspect of change that has occurred Bytown to Ottawa. And I know it's a kind of a hodgepodge that I've given you. Hopefully it gives you a flavor of how much and how far we've come. And that, like these 2 firefighters on my left, that lamp of knowledge and having the right tools, that we can look forward to a brighter future, and that firefighting, and we'll be telling those other stories of our modern firefighters. And one of the aspects that we're about to undertake is the history of women in the Ottawa Fire Service. We don't have it well documented. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that fantastic presentation. We'll now have a brief Q&A. So if anyone has a question, you can put it into the chat box and I'll ask Peter. But just to start us off, it would be really nice if you could tell us a bit more about the Bytown Fire Brigade Historical Society.
Thank you.
You know,
Well,
what you do if people want
yeah.
to.
So yeah, I invite our listeners. You know, the Bytown is 41 years old, and we receive no public funds. It's all raised through members, Ottawa firefighters, donors, what have you. We have a lot of different projects. We have trucks that if people like to learn how to drive antique fire trucks, we have trucks going back 103 years old that operate. They need tune-ups. And if you're interested in mechanical history, the evolution of mechanical engineering, we have industrial heritage, right? You get to drive it, and it's very interesting industrial heritage. It's an area of great interest in myself. We have thousands of artifacts, documents. We really do not have anyone here who knows anything about museum science. It's one of the aspects of what we've tried to do here is reform this place in terms of our collections reform. We're hoping to push materials into archives. We have documents from the 1900 fire. They're super delicate. We have paper goods that would be of great value to researchers and really belong in an archive as opposed to museum. Maybe we could make a digital copy and share it that way. But there's things that need to be protected. Yeah, we just need help, and anybody who is interested in fire service history, there's practical things to do here, and then there's research elements, there's cataloging. We're working to move this organization, and so anyone who would be interested, we would very, very pleased to have them.
That's very important work you're doing, preserving the history of firefighting in Ottawa. So we have a few questions. Bill asks, do fire departments have difficulties recruiting firefighters? What are the minimum qualifications and education for firefighting, and how has that changed over the years?
When I started, if you had a grade 10 education and you passed a physical and a simple medical, which was your eyes and a check by a doctor, you were a candidate. And then of course you had to do physical testing and aptitude testing. Subsequent to that, there's a host of, if you will, hundreds of people that attempt to get on. There's an aptitude test, psychological test, and police check, background check. There's a whole change in the way that people are recruited. And yes, it is difficult to get on. On average, people try 3 times. Some people are right out the gate, they get on number 1. I was 5 times. So, but when I did it, the test was every year, and I would make the grade, but they would only hire 12, and I was number 13, whatever, I got hired when they opened a new station, and that was good. But yeah, recruiting firefighters is very difficult, particularly in the volunteer area. And that's because they have families, jobs, and they may live in, I'll use it, Manotick or Greeley or somewhere, but they have to go to work during the day. So during the day, there's less people around to staff. In the past, you would have the local shopkeeper, the local gentleman working on a garage or whatever, and they would respond. And that's kind of dissolving away. In fact, we're seeing some changes in some of our districts in the what would be the Manotick area, a station being converted to, or I should say Stittsville, being converted to either a day crew or a mix, if you will, of, because it's currently all volunteer, and it'll convert to a paid unit. So yes, difficult.
Yeah, that sounds very difficult. Dan had a question about a photo that you used in a slide. In the photo of Hull, are those lumber sacks for housing people or piles of lumber? I don't know.
Those were piles of lumber. If you're referring to the 1900 shot, if that's the case, that's where the fire started, on that side of the river, and came across. But just to give you an idea of the fuel load, we would call it a fuel load. It was a massive fuel load, and the Ottawa side of the river was even worse. Like, I forget how many mills burnt down. There were like 12, 13 mills that were completely burnt down, and that fire just raced through, right? And it was a massive fire. But in 1903, Booth had already been, I'll say, admonished or advised, and there was a bylaw, and these guys, they had more money they could, shake sticks at, and so they essentially just they did whatever they wanted.
Thank you. And Lisa asks, that says that she wondered about the requirements and how fire departments will keep up with so many high rises being built, and similarly, she wonders if we will have enough elevator mechanics.
Well, I can't say elevator mechanic, so I have a nephew who's an elevator mechanic, and I know it's a very tough trade. But in terms of the high rises, the issue is that Ottawa is very, very proficient at fighting high-rise fires. They have high-rise procedures. And the issue is that they have to be updated and changed because we're now moving into 50 stories. We have Preston and Dow's Lake, 50 stories, and there's planned throughout the city, some, 50, 60, 70-story buildings. It's about time and life. And so when you see a fire up high, if you think of a fire in the street, a 1 or 2 story house, 3-story house, it's accessible by fire department ladders. There's a whole bunch of tactics that can be applied to it. When you get into a high rise, you have to move your whole firefighting components up to the floor, or 2 floors below as a staging area, and then move on to the fire floor. And you have a whole bunch of other hazards you have to deal with: confined space, wind, and the wind can blow torch down that hallway. And so, yeah, firefighting in high rise is a highly specialized aspect, and Ottawa has a great track record, a lot of research. I was involved in a significant portion of what we call wind-driven fire with the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, FDNY, Boston, Chicago. We did a lot of work on that type of stuff, and that information is resident in Ottawa. So they have the knowledge, but I think, again, new equipment will be required. You will need high pressure pumps, a 3-stage pump. Right now we run a 2-stage pump. It'll produce only so much pressure. But if you need to pump up 50 stories, you need a different kind of pump. So yeah, technology's got to change.
That sounds very challenging.
It is. It's highly technical. Yeah.
David asks, with the Dominion hand pump being an apparatus that operated in Bytown/Ottawa, does the Bytown Fire Brigade have any motorized vehicles in their collection that serve this area?
Yes, we do, actually. And again, I apologize. I could have, if things had worked out better and I had 18 hours to show you all the stuff that we have, I might get through some of it. Yes, we have motorized, I think we have 9 motorized apparatus. A 1928 American LaFrance with the first Buick overhead valve engine. And that's in our collection. That is an Ottawa Fire Department truck. It was actually an Ottawa Fire Department ladder, and it was converted to a pumper by the department. But it's in our collection, and it's one of 5 trucks that in 2000 did the Millennial Tour. They dipped the wheels in the Pacific and the Atlantic. And so they went coast to coast with these antique fire trucks. And in 2000, the oldest operating truck is an American LaFrance, and it's a 1921, so 103 years old. Next up the bat is a Model T chemical car. It's 102. And then the rest are 80s and 90-year-old in that ballpark. We have one that's a 1948, a 1939. They both run Ford Bickle. And again, American LaFrance was a brand that was very popular in the fire service, a manufacturer. So yes, we do have apparatus that are motorized and that do operate. And hence my earlier request, if you want to learn how to drive an old fire truck, we'll teach you. If you're willing to reciprocate and take it to a public event, you have to join the Bytown, and it's not expensive to join the Bytown. It's $25. But in your first year, if you're an active volunteer, it's free. So, and then $25 a year after that. And we have a City of Ottawa former fleet instructor who is on our board, and he will train you on how to operate those rigs.
Mhm. That sounds like it would be an amazing experience, just getting to drive a fire truck that old.
Yeah, it is. I'll tell you, it's a funny story. The first time I drove, one of the trucks we have is a Buffalo, and it's a 1928, and it's made by the Buffalo Fire Truck Company, and it's also known as a Buffalo. I drove it out of the garage. Let me back up. It was in a garage for 13 years and hadn't been started. We changed all the, spark plugs, condenser, a few things, battery, and went to start it. And all we hear is, whoa, vroom, vroom, vroom. And then, oh no, vroom, 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 vroom. Oh no. And then one of the older members, oh, just a minute, goes behind the seat, opens a door and turns a house tap, because it's a gravity-fed gas tank. So just a regular light on the side of your house. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It started like a charm. I pull it out of that garage, and when I pull it out of that garage, I'm being instructed by another the guy who originally restored that truck. And I go, oh my goodness, this is like, there's no power steering. Okay. And you cannot turn the wheels unless the truck's moving. And its turning radius is, let's just say, not a Fiat. And I said, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And the gentleman leans into me, says, better than horses. So, the advent of the mechanized truck created its own set of problems from horses, but I see what he says. It was better than horses.
It's amazing.
Yeah, Peter, I have a question. I saw those trucks there is two drivers, one in the front and one in the back, and this is in the States, right? In New York. Yeah.
Yep. So those are tiller ladder trucks. We do not have any, but Bytown did, or Ottawa did have tiller, but they were horse-drawn tillers. So they would have a set of horses in front, 2 or 3 horses pulling the ladder, and they would have mobile wheels because of the length to make corners. So they would position the back of the ladder as the horses went around the corner and swing that wheel to straighten it out so they could actually turn. So it was an extra set of steering wheels, if you will. And so that's called a tiller. And yes, Ottawa had wooden, if you can imagine, wooden aerial ladders that were tillers, and they were drawn by horses. And then,
yeah, smart.
Okay. It's really sweet. In the chat, I see a lot of people sharing about their family members that were firefighters. Karen says that her grandfather and great-grandfather worked for the Ottawa Fire Department, and her great-grandfather was at the Parliament Fire.
She should come and talk to us. Tell her to come and talk to us. We want her stories, because we're collecting stories. People have memorabilia. They have a picture. We would love to get a copy of that picture, because storytelling is what we want to do. We want to have a broader understanding of what actually happened in those times. And I just had a gentleman a couple of weeks ago. We have a walking stick, and I pointed out one of the companies that was formed was called the Rideau Company, and Captain Grisson and that Rideau Company, a French company, and there's a walking stick with a silver engraving on it. And it says, presented to Captain Grisson, Compagnie Rideau, the Rideau Company. And his great grandnephew called us and said, hey, I saw this thing on your website with the stick. He says, I have the writing set that they presented. So he's bringing that to us shortly. So it's the actual, they not only present him the walking stick, but we didn't even know this existed. So it's a silver, on wood, the little glass urns, writing set of the day.
Mhm.
And it says presented, it was a presentation to him in his retirement. So
Wow.
he was the first, if you will, guardian of the Rideau Company.
Mhm.
So that happens regularly here. So it's very cool.
That's amazing. Hopefully people will get in touch with you if they have stories or
We would
memorable
love it. Yeah.
things to share with
Yeah.
you. So
We're, again, we have a lot of work to do, but anybody that wants to come, we're open Fridays. We have an open house basically from 9 till 2. There's someone here at Fridays. People want to walk in and just have a look around and see what's here. We also open on request. And if the Historical Society wanted to host an event here, we would welcome, come in and have a tour, whatever. And we have people here who can, we have a lot of interesting apparatus. We have a steamer here that was completely restored to full working order, and it's a Silsby in 1886 Silsby, and it was acquired by Ottawa Fire, a pair of them from the Detroit Fire Department while they waited for their mechanical apparatus to arrive. They had worked out a deal with American LaFrance, the supplier of their motorized apparatus. Within 2 months of it being here, Russell was burning down, the town of Russell, and they put out a call to Ottawa. And that call to Ottawa resulted in a team of 6 Ottawa firefighters placing that steamer with a fired boiler onto a train, which was the Ottawa New York Central Railway. And it headed to, within 2 hours, it was in Russell. And they had a team of horses on the other end, hooked it up, brought it to the Castor River. They pumped for 3 days. They saved the town of Russell. And there's a children's book telling that story, and it's called How Silsby Saved the Day. And it was recently published. Tom Van Duzen, or one of the Van Duzens, published that book, and some great artists work in it. And we have that rig right here. We rescued it and rebuilt it. Yeah.
that's amazing. I can talk to my volunteers if you'd be good. It sounds like it could be a cool museum club visit.
Yeah, be glad to have anybody like to come. As I say, we have an open house every Friday. People drop in all the time, take a tour. Yeah, more than welcome.
All right.
If
So
you have an event, you want an old fire truck at an event, it's a community event, we do that stuff as well. So
fantastic. So I'll ask one more question from the chat, but also David's put a picture of an Ottawa tiller from 1904 in the chat. I don't think I can show everyone, but that's pretty cool.
is it a motorized one or a horse-drawn?
Horse-drawn.
Yeah. That's a Tavarge. I think it's a Tavarge tiller.
Yeah,
It was built in Montreal
it's fantastic.
with BC F.I.R.E. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
Bill asks, do full paid firefighters have second jobs to fill in time when there aren't lots of fires, or do only the volunteer firefighters have other jobs? I guess it is
I mean,
being a
yeah.
firefighter like
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is time off, right? And that time off and how you use that time off. Some actually do side jobs. They had a great. I am a licensed carpenter by trade. And yeah, on my days off, someone would ask me to fix something or do a basement, what have you, I would do it. But that's not the majority. Let's put it that way. What the majority you will find is most communities in the city of Ottawa, their hockey teams, their football teams, their soccer teams, their baseball teams, their community events wouldn't run if it wasn't for the fact that the firefighters were off. And so many of them are engaged in community service outside of the work. And so they're very, very active as members of the community. They're very engaged. So I would say that the majority are, I mean, you know, I did coaching. I did all kinds of stuff in schools. My wife is a teacher. And that's very consistent with Ottawa firefighters today.
Fantastic. And finally, Anne asks, where are you located? Where's the...
Yes, I guess I should have said. We're located at 2880 Sheffield Road. Yeah, which is just off Walkley before you hit the, you know, if you go too far, you're heading to the Queensway. But it's in an industrial park. We used to be right downtown in an old fire station, but on Cumberland and Clarence. But at that point in time, and the brigade had sunk a lot of resources into, you know, creating, if you will, a museum that was very well attended. We had space for a display, apparatus and what have you. But the mayor at the time confounded the brigade with the union, and there, you know, that political conflict between management and labor, and we got caught up in it, and so the building was basically sold out from underneath us, and we moved around, and then we bought this place. We own our building, and it's not a great big building. It's a 2-bay condominium with a second floor, and really, I would describe it as a museum in waiting. We don't have handicap access other than just the ground floor. You know, we're looking at whether we're going to put in an elevator. We have an offer from the Lions Club to do some stuff like that, but we have other issues, right? You know, our first issue is really do a collections reform and make sure the collection is properly protected, and that requires help from archives and like-minded people.
It sounds like a wonderful museum that in waiting that you have.
It is, you know, anybody who comes here loves. They love the things. They love the place. It's a beautiful spot. I mean, the history of Ottawa is told through fire, and I know a number of, you know, versions of the history of Ottawa has been told through fire, and residents here are people who have stories that are in some cases chilling, and in other cases just enthralling, because they have lived in the world of fire and know a lot about it. Right? So
it's very important. So thank you so much, Peter. That was a fantastic presentation, and thank you to everyone who came and joined us this evening. I hope you all have a wonderful night.
thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.